The conference room smelled like fresh toner and a cloying vanilla candle burning somewhere down the hall. The hard leather chair pressed sharply against my lower back, forcing me to sit perfectly straight. I sat across the wide mahogany table from Patricia Weil. A thin manila folder rested exactly in the center of the polished wood between us. My coffee had gone completely cold an hour ago in its white ceramic mug. I did not touch it. A single printed photograph lay face down next to my cup. Patricia stopped writing. She rested her silver pen against her yellow legal pad. "You mentioned a specific phrase," Patricia said, her voice clinical and calm. "You said he told you, quote, it was just a drunk kiss. Why is that exact wording important to you?" My jaw ached. I had been clenching my teeth since I parked my car in the garage downstairs. I focused my eyes on the fine grain of the table. "Because I heard it before." "When 5 years ago?" I said. My voice sounded remarkably steady. In a text message I was not supposed to see. Patricia did not ask another question. She did not tilt her head in sympathy. She just waited, letting the heavy silence fill the small room. I reached out. My fingertips brushed the smooth, glossy back of the photo paper. I flipped it over. I pushed it slowly across the table toward her. "He said it again," I told her. "At my birthday party, in front of 14 people. And my friend caught it on camera." Patricia looked down at the picture. Then she looked up at me. I did not feel victorious. I did not feel a rush of triumph. I just felt an overwhelming, bone-deep exhaustion. I had spent 14 years memorizing a map to a country that did not exist. I was not paranoid. I had never been unstable. The proof was right there, sharp and undeniable under the cold office lights. 5 weeks earlier, I turned 46. The kitchen smelled like slow roasted pork ribs and sweet barbecue sauce. Ice clinked sharply against glass as I filled the large metal cooler near the patio door. A small wireless speaker on the granite counter played upbeat music. I wiped down the kitchen island for the 3rd time, making sure no water spots remained near the sink. The house was absolutely spotless. I had been cleaning since 7 in the morning. 14 guests were coming today. It was not too many and not too few. It was just enough to fill the backyard so everyone would have someone to talk to. My name is Lynn Gallagher. I teach 11th grade English at a high school right here in Richmond. I am the kind of person who likes order, predictable lesson plans, and quiet weekends. I had painted the walls of this house myself, choosing a warm beige and taping off the baseboards carefully every summer to keep the edges clean. I wanted things to look right. I always wore a nice dress when hosting people, carrying on a habit from my mother, who always said, "You should dress like the day mattered." Today I wore a dark blue linen dress and my silver watch on my left wrist, the one I bought myself for my 40th birthday. I looked out the kitchen window into the humid Virginia afternoon. Craig stood on the brick patio holding a bottle of beer. He threw his head back and laughed loudly at something our neighbor said. He had a great, booming laugh. People always trusted Craig immediately. He was a general contractor, tall, with salt and pepper hair cut close to his scalp. He always knew exactly how to grip a man's hand and pat his shoulder to make him feel important. I watched him walk over to my younger sister. Amber had arrived early to help me set up, though she had spent the last hour outside chatting. She wore a bright yellow sundress that caught the sunlight. Craig handed her a fresh drink. His right hand settled on the small of her back. It rested there for just a second. His fingers pressed slightly into the yellow fabric. Then he moved away to check the grill. I blinked. I turned back to the stainless steel sink. I pushed the image away, shoving it right into the mental drawer where I kept every other little thing I did not want to examine too closely. I craved a peaceful afternoon. I needed everyone to get along. The front door opened with a loud click. Faye walked down the hallway and into the kitchen. Faye lived 2 blocks away in a house filled with overgrown potted plants and stacks of books. We had been close friends since our college days. She worked as a freelance photographer, mostly shooting weddings and local corporate events. She walked in carrying her heavy, mirrorless camera strapped across her chest. "I brought it," Faye said, tapping the black lens cap. "Otherwise, you would not have any pictures of your own party. Craig never remembers to take photos of you." I dried my hands on a cloth towel. "He takes pictures." Faye looked at me. "Right." She walked past the island toward the glass door. She stopped and looked out at the yard. She watched Craig. She watched Amber. She did not say a word. Faye never needed an invitation to speak her mind, but she also possessed a sharp instinct for when to stay quiet. She raised her camera and adjusted the top dial. The doorbell rang before I could ask her what she was framing in her shot. I opened the front door to find Danny standing on the porch. She was 19, a former student of mine home from her university for the weekend. She held a worn paperback copy of a classic novel we read in my class. A bright pink sticky note poked out from the top pages. "Happy birthday, Miss Gallagher," Danny said, holding out the book with a shy smile. "I brought this to show you. I still have your notes inside. You taught me how to read this right, how to see what the author was hiding. I never forgot." My throat felt tight. I smiled and pulled her into a quick hug. The soft paper cover pressed against my chest. We talked for 5 minutes on the porch about her classes and her new dormitory. Craig noticed us from the yard. He stood near the edge of the patio watching us talk, but he did not walk over to say hello. He just took another sip of his beer, his eyes flat, and then turned his back to us. The sun went down eventually. We gathered around the patio table and ate the cake. The air outside cooled down slightly, filled with the loud sounds of scraping chairs, clinking forks, and overlapping conversations. I grabbed empty plates and walked back into the house to get more paper towels. The kitchen felt incredibly quiet. It was much darker inside. The only illumination came from the small bulbs over the stove and the long, sharp angle of patio light spilling through the glass door. The refrigerator hummed a low, steady rhythm. The air smelled heavy, a thick mixture of sugary vanilla icing and the sharp, acrid smoke of blown-out birthday candles. I walked toward the pantry. My soft shoes made absolutely no sound on the tile floor. I stopped near the edge of the kitchen island. Amber stood pinned between the marble counter and Craig. He stood much too close to her. There was no physical space left between their bodies. My eyes went directly to his hands. His left hand gripped the edge of the counter. His right hand was tangled deep in the fabric of her yellow dress, resting low on her hip. His face was leaning down into hers. I stopped breathing. The low hum of the refrigerator suddenly sounded like a roaring engine in my ears. Craig lifted his head. He saw me standing by the pantry. Amber turned her head a fraction of a second later. Her eyes went wide. Her mouth fell open. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke a single word. I started counting in my head. 1, 2, 3. It was a grounding trick I taught my students when they suffered panic attacks before final exams. 4, 5. The kitchen tile felt like ice under my feet. Amber finally spoke. "Lynn, I am so Craig, cut her off." His voice did not shake. It sounded perfectly calm, entirely reasonable, exactly like a man explaining a minor delay in a construction project to an impatient client. "I drank too much," he said. He took a slow half-step back from her. He smoothed the front of his shirt with both hands. "You know I do not know what I am doing when I am drunk," he continued, his tone thick with an easy, practiced regret. "It was just a drunk kiss. It means nothing. It was just a drunk kiss." The words hit my chest like a physical blow. My jaw locked instantly. My teeth ground together so hard a sharp pain shot straight up into my temples. I knew those exact words. 5 years ago, we were sitting in his truck in our driveway. Heavy rain was hitting the windshield. I had found his phone left on the passenger seat. The screen lit up with a message from a number with no name saved. I had asked him about it, my voice shaking. He had looked at me with deep, genuine pity. He had told me I was making things up out of thin air. He had used those exact words to explain away the message. I had cried in the passenger seat. I had apologized for doubting him. I had carefully rewritten my own memory to match his story, convincing myself I was the problem. Now he was standing in our dark kitchen using the exact same script. You do not reuse an apology word for word if it is the very first time you are making a mistake. He took a step toward me. His voice dropped into that soft, gentle register he always used when he wanted to fix me. "Please do not make a big deal out of this right now," Craig said, gesturing toward the glass door. "We have guests outside." Amber stared hard at the floor, refusing to look at my face. "It is fine," I said. The words came out automatically, smooth, hollow, and perfectly polite. I did not say it because I felt fine. I said it because 14 years of marriage had completely trained me to believe that my emotional reaction was always the real problem. If I yelled, he would say I was unstable. If I cried, he would call me dramatic. The only way to survive in this house was to absorb the blow and keep the surface of the water perfectly still. I turned around and walked into the pantry. I grabbed a fresh roll of paper towels. I did not look at either of them as I walked back through the kitchen and toward the sliding glass door. I stepped out into the humid evening air. I smiled warmly at the neighbor sitting near the wooden steps. I offered him a napkin for his cake. I played the gracious host. Near the wooden fence, Faye stood entirely still with her camera raised to her eye. The lens pointed directly at the kitchen window. She lowered it slowly when she saw me come out. I did not meet her eyes. The house was completely empty by midnight. The dirty plates sat stacked in the sink. At 47 minutes past 12, I lay awake in the dark of our master bedroom. Craig slept soundly on his side of the mattress. His breathing was a slow, rhythmic intake of air that vibrated slightly in his chest. He had fallen asleep the moment his head hit the pillow, completely untroubled by anything that had happened. The ceiling fan clicked softly above us, pushing warm air around the room. I turned my head and looked at his silhouette in the dark. The man who had spent 14 years looking me in the eye and telling me I was seeing things that were not there. I reached for my phone resting on the wooden nightstand. The bright, white light of the screen made my eyes water. I did not open my internet browser. I did not send a text message to Faye. I opened my notes application. I usually use this digital notepad to track my grading deadlines or type out quotes from books I wanted to use in my classroom. I created a new blank page. My thumbs hovered over the glass keyboard. I typed, "He said it was just a drunk kiss. My 46th birthday, 8:31 in the evening. Kitchen. 14 people outside." I stared at the glowing letters. My thumb rested dangerously close to the delete button. It would be so incredibly easy to erase it. It would be so easy to wake up tomorrow, make a pot of coffee, and pretend the kitchen was just a kitchen. My chest ached. My throat felt like it was closing up. I had spent so long keeping the peace in this house that I forgot what the truth actually looked like. I tapped the return key. I typed another line. I heard this exact phrase before. 5 years ago. I thought I imagined it. I locked the phone. The bright screen went black. The room plunged back into heavy darkness. I placed the phone carefully under my pillow. I closed my eyes. The rhythmic clicking of the ceiling fan echoed loudly in the quiet room. I did not know what I was going to do next. I did not have a grand plan. I did not have a lawyer picked out, but I knew one thing for certain as I listened to his steady breathing. This time was different. I did not know exactly how it would be different, but I knew I would not open that application tomorrow morning and delete those words. The sun came up on Sunday morning without asking for my permission. I walked 2 blocks down the tree-lined sidewalk to Faye's house. The air felt heavy and damp. I did not call ahead. Faye opened her front door before I even raised my hand to knock. She had a fresh pot of coffee already brewed. A thick loaf of sourdough bread sat sliced on a wooden cutting board. Her kitchen was significantly warmer than mine. Overgrown pothos plants trailed down the sides of her cabinets, and stacks of hardcover books covered half the dining table. It did not look like a magazine cover. It looked like a place where someone actually lived. Faye did not ask me if I was okay. She poured a dark mug of coffee and pushed it across the counter. I kept the pictures, Faye said. I paused with my hand reaching for the warm ceramic mug. How many 17? From the time the guests were eating cake until you walked out of the kitchen. I looked at the steam rising from my coffee. You knew Faye leaned against the edge of her sink. I saw him watching her all evening. I was not entirely sure. So I took the pictures. She picked up her digital phone from the counter. She unlocked the screen, opened her photo album, and pushed the device across the smooth wood toward me. I looked down. I did not feel a sudden rush of rage. I did not want to scream or throw the heavy mug against the wall. I felt something entirely different. I felt a cold, sharp confirmation. There is a massive difference between feeling deeply hurt and finally holding the concrete proof of something you have always known in your gut. It was a bizarre kind of relief. The clarity settled right into my bones. "What do you want me to do with them?" Faye asked quietly. "Nothing yet," I told her. "But please do not delete them." I should have paid more attention to how easily I said those words. I did not. By Wednesday afternoon, I found myself sitting in a small room in Carytown. The law office was much more cramped than I expected. A dying ficus tree stood in the corner, its brown leaves curling inward toward the trunk. Heavy legal volumes lined the bookshelves. Several framed degrees hung perfectly straight on the eggshell wall. Patricia Weil sat behind a neat mahogany desk. She got straight to the point. She did not ask me if I was absolutely sure I wanted to do this. I appreciated her clinical precision more than I could express. "Virginia is a fault divorce state," Patricia explained. She folded her hands together on top of a yellow notepad. "You do not need a mandatory separation period if you file on the grounds of adultery. We can file the paperwork immediately." "He makes less money than I do," I said. My voice sounded remarkably flat in the quiet office. "He is a general contractor. His income is completely unpredictable. He will undoubtedly claim alimony." Patricia shook her head slowly. "Adultery is an absolute bar to alimony in Virginia, barring a finding of manifest injustice. The courts very rarely apply that exception. Basically, if he cheated, he loses his right to ask you for financial support." I sat perfectly still. I listened to the faint hum of the air conditioning unit in the window. "There is something else," Patricia continued. "Virginia is a one-party consent state. If you are participating in a conversation, you can record it. You do not need to warn him or ask for his permission." 14 years. For 14 long years, he had looked me directly in the eye and told me I was imagining things. He told me I analyzed every little detail until I ruined our happiness. And now, the law of the state handed me a digital recorder. I felt a strange shift deep in my chest. I had walked into this office wondering if I could survive the next few months. I sat there realizing I was already building the exact infrastructure I needed to dismantle his lies. Patricia explained the legal standard required for court. She called it clear and convincing evidence. It was a higher burden than most states required because adultery remained a Class 4 misdemeanor here. She told me Faye's photographs were a very strong start, but we would need corroboration to make the case completely airtight. I pulled a small notebook from my purse and wrote it all down. "Will I face any legal trouble if I record him without him knowing?" I asked, before I gathered my things to leave. "No," Patricia said firmly. "As long as you are physically present in the room and participating in that conversation." I drove home that evening knowing exactly what I had to do. On Friday of the second week, I pulled into my driveway at 6:30. Craig was already home. I opened the front door and immediately heard the loud, obnoxious clapping of a television game show coming from the living room. The house smelled faintly of stale beer and the heavy leather of the sofa. The bright light from the television flickered rapidly across the dark hardwood floor. Everything looked exactly like it did 2 weeks ago. It physically hurt my eyes to look at him and see nothing changed on the surface. I set my heavy leather work bag down on the edge of the sofa. My cellular phone rested deep in my cardigan pocket. The recording application was already running silently. I had pressed the red button right before I turned my brass key in the front door lock. I sat down in the armchair across from him. Craig lounged on the leather cushions with a green glass bottle in his hand. He looked completely comfortable. "Did you talk to Amber today?" I asked. My voice was entirely conversational. I did not sound angry or accusatory. I sounded exactly like the woman who had asked him thousands of mundane questions over the last decade. Craig pressed a button on his remote control. The television went silent. He turned his upper body heavily on the cushions and looked at me. I saw the shift happen instantly in his eyes. He did not look defensive. He looked weary. He wore the practiced, exhausted expression of a patient man dealing with a very difficult child. "You are starting this again," Craig sighed. "I just wanted to say," I began. 14 years, Lynn," he interrupted. His voice filled the quiet room thick with manufactured disappointment. 14 years of this. Every single time I speak to another woman, you do this. I saw it with my own eyes, I told him. Craig lowered his voice. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. "What exactly did you see?" "A hug at a birthday party. Do you have any idea how you look when you say things like this?" I stopped breathing. My hands felt cold. I gripped the fabric of my skirt. It was a script. I realized it right then, as his smooth voice washed over me. He was not making this up as we went along. He was reciting lines he had memorized and perfected. He used variations of this same exact speech for years. "You look paranoid. You create drama out of thin air. Do you know what my friends think of you?" The script never changed because it never needed to change. It always worked. It always made me back down, question my own sanity, and apologize. Until today, I did not argue with him. I did not raise my voice to defend my perception of reality. I simply stood up from the armchair. He did not know about the high-resolution photographs sitting in Faye's digital storage. He did not know about the recording application capturing every single syllable inside my pocket. And he certainly did not know about the digital notepad containing 43 separate times he had told me I was seeing things that were not real. He was reciting his lines because they always worked. This time I had a transcript. "I worry about you," Lynn Craig called out to my back as I walked away. "You really need to talk to someone about these delusions." I did not answer him. I walked down the carpeted hallway and went into the master bedroom. I closed the heavy wooden door behind me until the latch clicked shut. I sank down onto the floor next to the bed. I pulled the phone out of my pocket and stopped the recording. I opened my digital notepad. I created a new entry. I typed the exact words he just used to dismiss my reality. He said, "Do you have any idea how you look when you say things like this Friday week 2? Recorded?" I stared at the screen. I scrolled to the very top of the list. Entry number 1 was from the night of the birthday party. Entry number 43 was today. I had the concrete evidence. I had a sharp attorney. I had his exact manipulations documented and time-stamped. I sat on the floor in the quiet room. I should have felt like I was winning. I should have felt incredibly powerful. But he was still out there in the living room drinking his beer on my sofa, and I was still sitting on the floor in the dark. I did not know it then. I did not know that when I dropped my heavy work bag on the sofa in the living room, a small white rectangle had slipped out of the side pocket. It fluttered down to the hardwood floor near the wooden leg of the coffee table. Craig stood up to get another beer from the kitchen. He looked down. He saw the card resting on the floorboards. Patricia Weil, family law attorney. He did not pick it up right away. He just stared at the bold black letters printed on the thick cardstock. I sat on the floor of the bedroom, staring blankly at my phone screen. A moment later, I heard the faint murmur of his voice through the drywall. He was making a phone call. His tone sounded completely different now. It was low, incredibly careful, and stripped of all its easy charm. I could not hear the name of the person he was talking to. I pressed my hand against the carpet and listened to the low, urgent rumble of a man who finally realized he was trapped. On Monday afternoon of the third week, the afternoon light slanted across the empty wooden desks in my classroom. I stood at my desk, sliding a stack of graded essays into a thick folder. A faint, metallic rattling echoed from the hallway as a custodian pushed a cleaning cart past my open door. My phone vibrated on the wooden desk. The screen showed Amber calling. I answered it. She said she wanted to apologize. Her voice sounded thin and strained. She did not actually call to apologize. She took a quick breath and said Craig told her I was preparing some kind of lawsuit. She said the entire family would fall apart over a simple drunk kiss. I held the phone tight against my ear. I asked her who told her he was filing a lawsuit. Amber paused. She said he was just worried. I looked at the old map of Richmond I had found at a flea market hanging on the back wall. I asked her if she knew she was not the first one. The line went completely dead quiet. I told her that silence was her answer. I pressed the button to end the call. Craig already knew about the lawyer. He had found out and immediately called Amber to coordinate their story before he ever confronted me. The panic was beginning to show through his perfect mask. 3 days later, Amber drove an hour and a half down from Charlottesville. We met at a small coffee shop in the near West End. The air inside smelled strongly of roasted beans and scalded milk. Amber sat across from me at a tiny metal table. She looked down at her hands the entire time. This time, her apology sounded real. She was not reciting a script. She nervously peeled the paper sleeve off her cup. She told me Craig was incredibly unhappy. She said he told her we were going to get a divorce anyway. I took a slow sip of my black coffee. I set the cup down carefully on the metal table. I asked her a single question. I asked if she truly believed she was the first person he had ever said that to. Amber snapped her head up. Her eyes met mine for the very first time. I did not feel any lingering anger toward her. I just felt a profound, heavy pity. I told her I did not need an answer right now. I told her that whenever she figured out the answer, it would decide exactly where she stood in his long line of mistakes. I left a few dollar bills on the table and walked out the glass door. Patricia officially served Craig with the divorce papers on Tuesday morning of the 4th week. I had specifically asked her to wait until I was safely inside my school building. At 47 minutes past 6 that evening, I sat alone in my car in the empty school parking lot. Cold rain fell steadily against the windshield. A single street lamp flickered weakly in the distance, its yellow light smearing across the wet glass. My canvas work bag rested on the passenger seat, filling the damp air inside the car with the familiar smells of old paperback books and chalk dust. My phone rang. It was not Craig. It was Principal Ferguson. His voice sounded painfully careful, thick, with the heavy caution of an administrator making an official inquiry. He told me Craig Gallagher had contacted the main office. Craig had sent a formal email outlining serious concerns about my mental health. He claimed my unstable behavior at home was creating an unpredictable and dangerous environment for my students. Ferguson cleared his throat. He said the district required a brief review process. He assured me it was standard procedure and not a final conclusion. I thanked him politely for letting me know. I ended the call. The rain picked up, drumming a loud, chaotic rhythm against the metal roof of my car. I did not cry. I did not hit the steering wheel in anger. I sat completely frozen in the driver's seat, sinking into a dark, suffocating doubt. He had told me I was crazy so many times. What if he was right? What if I really was unstable? What if I had spent 5 years destroying my own marriage because my mind was broken? My hands shook as I unlocked my phone. I opened my digital notepad. I did not type anything new. I just started reading. Entry number 1 described my birthday party. It documented the exact time and his exact excuse about the drunk kiss. I scrolled down. I read all 43 entries spanning 5 years. I read the dates, the times, the specific contexts, and the precise quotes. I saw the phrase, "You are imagining things," written 14 separate times. I saw "You always do this" recorded 9 times. I stopped at entry number 17 from 2 years ago. I had typed that Craig told me I was too perceptive for my own good. I stared at the glowing letters in the dark car. People losing their grip on reality do not take meticulous time-stamped notes. I was a high school English teacher. I spent my entire career teaching 16-year-old kids how to read a text. I taught them how to recognize when an author was saying one thing but meaning something entirely different. I had taught this skill my entire adult life. The heavy fog of doubt instantly evaporated. The air in the car felt clean and sharp. I was not crazy. I had simply been paying attention. Early in the 5th week, Patricia called me while I was grading papers at my kitchen table. She told me the court had officially served Amber with a subpoena. The deposition was scheduled in exactly 10 days. Patricia sounded incredibly satisfied. She told me Amber had hired her own attorney, and that attorney immediately notified our office that Amber intended to invoke her Fifth Amendment right to remain silent. Since adultery was still classified as a misdemeanor in Virginia, she had the legal right not to incriminate herself. I asked Patricia if that was a problem for us. Patricia let out a short, sharp laugh. She explained it was the best possible outcome. In a civil divorce deposition, if a witness invokes the right to remain silent, the judge is legally allowed to draw an adverse inference. The court would assume her silence was an absolute confirmation of the affair. Craig had manipulated Amber into protecting him, and by doing so, she was going to accidentally destroy his entire defense. I felt a grim, quiet satisfaction. The truth was finally deploying itself without me having to push it. Then Patricia paused. The line grew very quiet. She told me there was one more thing. Craig had hired a very aggressive lawyer and officially counter-filed against me. He was claiming I caused him severe emotional distress by secretly surveilling him inside his own home. He submitted a motion to the court demanding financial damages. I held my breath, my grading pen hovering motionless over a student essay. I asked Patricia if a motion like that could actually succeed in court. She answered immediately, telling me it would absolutely fail. But she added, her voice dropping lower, it was going to cost us a tremendous amount of time and a staggering amount of money to fight it. The motion for emotional distress never made it to a judge. By Thursday morning of the 5th week, we were sitting in a small conference room inside Patricia's office building. The air conditioning unit hummed a low, steady drone in the background. A small black recording device sat dead center on the wooden table. The room smelled faintly of old coffee and the sharp tang of freshly printed paper. 4 of us sat around the table. Patricia and I sat on one side. Craig sat directly across from me, flanked by his attorney, a man named Russell Hatch, who wore a faded navy blue suit that looked like it had been dry cleaned 100 times. A court reporter sat quietly in the corner, her fingers resting lightly on the keys of her machine. Craig sat up perfectly straight. A small, familiar smile played at the corners of his mouth. It was a reflex performance. He did this every single time he walked into a room where he needed to charm his way out of a corner. Patricia began with the standard factual questions. Craig answered confidently. He leaned back in his chair. He had clearly prepared his lines. Then Patricia opened her thick manila folder clue. "Mr. Gallagher," Patricia said, her voice dropping into an incredibly smooth, even tone. "How did you describe the events that took place in the kitchen during your wife's birthday party?" Craig did not blink. "I drank too much. It was just a friendly kiss." "It meant absolutely nothing. Your exact phrase was, 'It was just a drunk kiss,'" Patricia clarified. "That is correct," Craig nodded. Patricia did not rush. She reached into the folder. She pulled out 3 glossy photographs. She placed them face down on the table. She flipped the first one over and pushed it toward him. "Can you describe what you see in this photograph?" Patricia asked. Russell Hatch leaned forward immediately. "Objection. My client is not required to. I am asking Mr. Gallagher to describe what he sees in a photograph taken at an event he attended." Patricia interrupted smoothly. I watched Craig look down at the picture. The small smile vanished from his face. It was not a dramatic, explosive reaction. It was like watching someone walk over and switch off a lamp in a dark room. The light just died. The first picture showed Craig and Amber in the kitchen. The timestamp on the bottom read 8:28 in the evening. Patricia reached out and flipped the second photo. The timestamp read 8:29. It was a different angle, showing the complete lack of space between their bodies. The room grew incredibly quiet. The only sound was the soft, rhythmic clicking of the court reporter pressing her keys. Patricia flipped the third photograph. 8:31. It clearly showed Craig's hand tangled in the yellow fabric of Amber's dress, resting low on her hip, his face pressing down into hers. Craig swallowed hard. He looked sideways at his lawyer. Russell Hatch stared intently at the wooden table. "Do you still describe this as a friendly, drunk kiss?" Patricia asked. "I do not," Craig started, his voice suddenly sounding an octave lower. I cannot tell from the angle. Patricia did not let him finish. She pulled a thick stack of stapled paper from her folder and laid it next to the photographs. "I have a certified transcript here," Patricia said, "from a recording made 2 weeks after the party inside the Gallagher residence. The recording has already been reviewed and confirmed admissible under Virginia law. In it, you told your wife, and I quote, 'You are starting this again 14 years every single time I speak to another woman.' Do you recall making that statement?" Craig stared at the transcript. He did not look at his lawyer this time. He looked directly at me. I sat perfectly still in my hard chair. I had spent 5 years waiting for this exact moment. I had imagined it playing out 1,000 different ways in my head. I thought it would feel like a massive explosion. I thought there would be shouting or crying or some grand admission of guilt. But it was not grand at all. It was just a hollow man sitting in a small room, staring at a piece of paper, completely unable to speak. I realized in that quiet moment that I did not actually need him to confess. I did not need his validation. I did not need him to say he was sorry or to finally admit that I had been right all along. I already knew I was right. I had always known. The air conditioner hummed. The court reporter waited. Craig finally cleared his throat. He stared blankly at the 3 photographs. "I want to talk about a settlement." Russell Hatch reached out and placed a heavy hand on Craig's forearm. The lawyer gave his client a slow, tight shake of his head, silently communicating exactly how much leverage they had just lost. Patricia looked over at me. I looked at her, and I gave a single, firm nod. The next morning, I walked into my empty classroom before the first bell rang. I had barely set my bag down when Principal Ferguson appeared in the doorway and asked me to step into his office. I sat down in the wooden chair across from his desk. Ferguson looked tired, but he offered me a small, genuine smile. "The review process is complete," Ferguson said. "There are absolutely no findings against you. The district considers the matter entirely closed." I let out a slow breath. "Thank you for letting me know." He held up a hand. "Wait." He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a thin stack of paper. He placed it carefully on the desk between us. "I have been an educator for 29 years. I have never seen anything like this. These are 12 unsolicited letters from your students and their parents. They submitted them independently after rumors of the review started circulating." I stared at the neatly typed pages. Nobody had asked them to do this. "Read the top one," Ferguson suggested gently. "Gallagher taught us how to read the truth inside the things people write down, and anyone who calls her unstable has clearly never sat in her classroom." I pulled the next page. It was a short note from Danny, the former student, who had stopped by the house on my birthday. I read her words through a sudden blur of tears. I drove back from college when I heard Danny had written, "Miss Gallagher taught me how to recognize when someone is rewriting the truth. She did not teach this by accident." I carefully set the papers back down on his desk. I did not feel relieved about my job. I felt profoundly moved. The fierce, desperate battle I had been fighting with Craig evaporated completely. It did not matter anymore. This was the community I had built with my own two hands, and his lies were not strong enough to tear it down. We signed the final settlement papers on Tuesday of the 6th week. Because of the absolute bar in the state law, Craig walked away without a single penny of alimony. The house was going on the market next month. I did not want to keep it. It was not because the walls held too many painful memories. It was simply because I had painted those rooms every summer for 14 years, and now I wanted to pick out colors for a different house. On Saturday afternoon, Faye drove her car up to the curb to help me pack the first set of boxes. October had finally arrived in Richmond. The air felt incredibly crisp and light, carrying that specific electric charge of a blank page waiting to be written on. The leaves on the massive oak trees lining the street were just beginning to turn bright orange at the edges, but they had not started falling yet. I stood on the front sidewalk, looking up at the house. Faye stood right beside me, spinning her car keys loosely around her index finger. "Are you okay?" Faye asked quietly. I did not answer right away. I listened to the wind rustling through the high branches. "I am just thinking about that I spent 18 years teaching teenagers how to read between the lines," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "And it took me 5 years to finally do it with my own life." Faye stopped spinning her keys. 5 years is not a long time, Lynn. Not when you were actively trained every single day to stop believing your own mind. We stood together on the concrete sidewalk in the cool autumn breeze. Nobody said anything else. I thought about the digital application hidden inside my phone. I thought about those 43 entries. For weeks, I had viewed that list as a terrible record of every time he had hurt me. But standing there in the sunlight, I realized I had been reading it completely wrong. It was not a catalog of my weakness. It was a timeline of my survival. Every single time he told me I was crazy, a tiny, stubborn piece of my brain refused to surrender. 43 separate times, I had trusted myself just enough to write down the truth, even if I lacked the courage to say it out loud. I reached into my cardigan pocket and pulled out my phone. I unlocked the screen and scrolled down to the application. I opened it one last time. I looked at the very last entry I had typed that morning at 2 minutes past 8. Settlement signed. The house goes on the market next month. I am okay. I pressed my finger against the screen. I highlighted the entire application. I tapped the icon to delete it permanently. The screen flashed once, and the long list vanished forever. Faye watched me put the phone back into my pocket. She did not ask me what I was doing. She just offered me a warm, knowing smile. "All right," I said, clapping my hands together once. "Let us go pack." We walked up the concrete path together. The front door stood wide open. The bright October afternoon poured directly into the empty hallway, bringing the smell of dry leaves and damp earth inside. I stepped over the threshold and walked toward the kitchen to pick up my very first box. 14 months later, I stood in the middle of a sunlit living room in the Fan District. The air smelled of fresh latex paint and the sharp, clean scent of mineral spirits. I was not painting the walls a safe, neutral beige. I held a thick roller dripping with a deep, unapologetic navy blue. I did not bother putting painter's tape along the baseboards this time. If a few drops of color splattered on the old hardwood floors, I decided they could stay right there as permanent proof that someone actually lived and breathed in this space. Faye sat on a canvas drop cloth near the large bay window. She had her heavy digital camera resting in her lap. She was not taking pictures to build a legal case anymore. She was just taking pictures of a woman painting her own house. I rolled the bright blue paint in a long, wide stroke across the dry wall. I thought about the woman who had stood in that dark kitchen counting to 5, desperately trying to swallow her own reality just to keep the peace. I did not feel sorry for her anymore. I just felt profoundly grateful that she finally found her way out. I still teach my students how to read between the lines. But I added a new rule to my classroom this year. I teach them that when someone looks you directly in the eye and tells you it is raining while you can actively feel the hot sun burning your shoulders, you do not ask them for an umbrella. You do not apologize for staying dry. You turn around and you walk away. It took me 5 years to realize my mind was not broken. It took 43 hidden notes to finally believe my own eyes. You do not need a courtroom or a sworn deposition to validate what you already know deep in your bones. A lie only survives in the heavy silence of a dark room. It suffocates the very second you drag it out into the sharp light of day. If you are listening to this right now while sitting in a parked car or folding laundry in an empty house or lying awake next to someone who makes you question your own sanity, I want you to do one thing today. Pull out your phone. Open a completely blank page. Write down the absolute truth of exactly what you saw. You do not need anyone else to confirm it. You just need to believe it yourself. Tell me, what is the very first sentence you are going to write?